So I just thought that I would talk a little bit about average speed, on the bike. So you have to consider a lot of things when you're considering your speed on the bike, and one of those things is what kind of average speed you have, because there's actually 3 different kinds of average speed. One is your time elapsed average speed, and this is the total time and the total distance, including all your time that you spent stopping. This is important because this is the difference between racing and not racing. Because when you don't race, you hit stoplights, or you even take a break, any kind of break on your bike is considered. And the time, and it's important to consider this because when you take a break, your body is able to recuperate and you're able to go faster when you get back on the bike. So your average speed for racing is going to be your total time over your distance. So you have to figure out how to not stop. And if you ever stop, you have to include that time in one sense. Okay? But then there's going to be your average rolling speed, which is what a lot of people think is stops don't affect that. They don't slow it down. Stops do slow it down, and this is not just because when you stop, the time wasted when you're not moving isn't calculated in your average rolling speed, but your average rolling speed does include the fact that you have to slow down and then speed up again. So there's that right there, and then of course there's wasted momentum whenever you hit your brakes. So when you have to slow down, that wasted momentum is it's a big factor that people tend to forget. So furthermore, we have to talk about what kind of bike you have and what kind of terrain and atmosphere. Because I live in Colorado Springs, and the terrain here has its own terrain. There's places where it's just rolling hills. There's places where there's mountains. Of course, there's Pikes Peak. You can go up that. There's 14% incline for like a mile as part of the Pikes Peak incline. So you do have to pay a toll fee, but you are allowed to bike up that. And if you want a mountain climb, then climb from Colorado Springs, go up to Manitou Springs, and then go up the pass, Highway 24, until you get to the special road that goes up to the toll road. Then you pay the toll, which is like 10 or 15 bucks depending on the season, and you can climb. And I'm telling you, your average speed isn't going to be very fast, even if you include going down. And people don't consider this. When you go downhill, and you can look this up, this is a total fact. When you go downhill, you're going to very seriously be limited with how much speed you have. When you go to, if we lived in space, when you went downhill, you would eventually go 100 miles an hour. But that's not what happens. You're limited by air. So when you go uphill, you're limited by the hill. But so you can push a lot of your energy uphill. And you gain so much potential energy that your average speed would actually wind up being faster. But it isn't faster. It's slower when you have hills, and the reason is when you go downhill, your speed is limited by the aerodynamics. So you can only go, 50, 52 miles an hour down certain hills, as opposed to just keep going up in speed to match the speed that you were slowed down when you went up the hill. Okay, which is a complicated way of saying that hills really do affect your average speed. So finally, you have your average pace, which is a little bit different than speed because it doesn't include stops at all and does not include your acceleration time. Okay? And it matters a lot when racing because your average pace is pretty much your average racing speed. Okay? Your legitimate speed if you never had to stop. Except an average pace doesn't really include your turning. So in a criterium, it would be relatively slower. But in any case, when you're rolling on the ground, you're going to look down at your speedometer and you're going to see a certain speed, and that can be considered your average pace if you've already gotten up to speed. Okay, and generally speaking, this is going to be quite a bit faster than your average speed. It's going to be called your average pace. And so a lot of people talk about like 15 miles per hour and stuff, but you're not really the best. You're not really to be considered at all a cyclist until you're doing at least an average pace of 20 miles per hour on a road bike with 23 or 25 millimeter tires. Now, if you have bigger tires, it really starts to slow you down. I have bigger tires on my bike, and my bike's a lot heavier. It has 7-pound wheels. So, you know, when I talk about 7-pound wheels, you know, that really slows you down. You lose most of your momentum. So in order to avoid that problem, okay, you need to use the same bike for a long amount of time, okay, or at least come back to the same bike once in a while. I know some people have like 10 different bikes and they do all kinds of different stuff, but if you actually ride the same route with the same bike, average speed can be a very good indicator of your fitness, okay, and the best indicator of your fitness, especially when we're talking about physical strength and power and how much you weigh and whatnot, is going to be up hills and hill climbs, because on flat land, extra weight doesn't really slow you down that much, nor does lower power, because when you're on flats, what really matters the most is aerodynamics, and you can really lose a lot of power, but yet still have a faster average speed on flat land if you somehow gave yourself a body position that is advantageous for your average speed on flat land. In other words, you can actually slowly lose muscle and lose strength if you get accustomed to being focused too much on your speed, which is perhaps the worst problem with average speed, is it doesn't really tell you your actual power. It just tells you your real world performance. So when you get up a hill, eventually one day, you go up that hill very slowly, and that can be a big problem. So it's better to measure your average speed when you're going up hills and whatnot, and consider your average pace after going up hills. And then your average pace is going to be pretty limited when you're going up hills, because you're going to slow down, and it's going to be all based on how much strength you have and how much power you have versus how much you weigh. So if you're fatter, or you're gaining more fat instead of muscle, the best way to tell is to go up the same hill climb twice a week for like several weeks. You eventually reach a point where you're going to know exactly where you're at, because there aren't very many variables, and so the average speed is basically telling you how fast you're going because of your strength, especially if you're going slower than 15. So you want to find a hill where you're going slower than 15 miles an hour, which is, relatively speaking, slower than 20 kilometers per hour, somewhere around there, okay, and for a good amount of time, like 20 minutes. And if you can't find a hill like that, then you're out of luck. You need to really try to find a hill that has at least 15 minutes, if not more, like 20 minutes, okay, of steady climbing. It's close by, otherwise you need to drive to it and climb it on the bike. But you really need it. You really need 2 of those a week to tell you your average speed over the course of a month, in which your speed's not going to really increase that much. In fact, if your speed's increasing really quickly, the reason why is probably because of bike fit. Your body's adapting to the fit of the bike, and you're figuring out naturally how to position your muscles. You don't really get that much more strength within a matter of weeks or anything like that. People pretend they do. That's not the truth. The truth is your nerves and everything are adapting to the position on the bike. Realistically, that takes only in a couple of weeks, and so within 2 weeks you'll see a jump of maybe 5 miles per hour average, but that's not strength, that's definitely just your fit. There's other things as well that can happen that make you jump up real early with your muscles and stuff, but it's not necessarily your muscles getting super strong super fast. That doesn't really happen. One thing that can happen is called muscle memory, and it happens when your muscles kind of start to learn with your nerves how well to work and stuff. So, but that's all for understanding average speed. So your best